All right, guys, we're going to try this again. And this is kind of a weird way of doing it because I'm struggling with my computer glitching a little bit, but we will see how this works. So I want to just do a quick review of some of the stuff that we covered the other day, and then we'll cover some new material as well. The morning class got a little bit farther than the afternoon class, so in some places, morning class students, you're just going to have to bear with me a little bit, all right? Remember, we started with the Om Shanti chant, and I'm not going to hit every slide because this is just a quick review. Remember the term Sanatana Dharma. You need to be familiar with that term, and the fact that it refers to eternal or ageless religion or duty, right? We spent some time talking about the fact that there are over 330 million deities in Hinduism, and we spent some time talking about the difference between philosophical Brahmanic tradition and the average practitioner. Remember, some of the things that we're covering are things that scholars pay attention to in terms of the study of Hinduism, things that are part of the ancient Brahmanic tradition. And remember, some of these things have changed over the years, and that there was, or historically has been, a difference between the high caste Brahmanic tradition and your average practitioner who couldn't read Sanskrit. And there's a difference between practice many years ago as well as practice today. So just things to keep in mind. And remember, I used the example of the story of Ganesh, right? You ask 5 different Hindus about the story of Ganesh, and you are likely to get at least a few different versions of the story. So there is a wide variety that exists under the umbrella of Hinduism. This is important. More so in the afternoon class, we talked about inserting Brahman for God here, because remember, Brahman is that universal, ultimate reality that permeates the universe, exists, immanent, transcendent, and pervades everything, right? Bigger than the gods. And our own Atmans, remember, are just a spark of Brahman, right? A spark off the flame or off the fire, using the example of the gentleman whose video we listened to the other day. So everything in existence is an expression of Brahman, right? Or the ultimate sacred reality. The proper aim of anyone's life is to come close to and realize and merge with Brahman, and that there are all those temptations in the world that are trying to keep us from reconnecting with Brahman and pursuing our Dharma. We spent a lot of time talking about the Vedas. Remember, they were written in Sanskrit. I'm not going to go through all the Vedas again today because we already covered that, but do remember that the classic main Hindu scriptures are the Vedas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Puranas. So we'll skip through the Vedas here, but I do want to spend a few minutes talking about the law of samsara again. There were a lot of questions, especially in the afternoon class, about the law of samsara, the law of reincarnation. Remember, you do need to know that it's called the law of samsara. So if on a test you are asked about it, reincarnation is not good enough. Got to know law of samsara, okay? This is part of learning the terms that go along with this particular religious tradition. Okay, so remember, you are born, and you are born with an Atman. You're born with your soul, right? I used the metaphor of a bucket, right? So you're born with your Atman, and in your Atman, you have a given amount of karma. You have whatever amount of karma you are born with, right? And over the course of your lifetime, you accumulate more karma in your Atman, or it builds up in your Atman, based on your good works and actions and your ability to follow your dharma or your duty, okay? When you die, if you have enough karma, right, if you've attained enough karma, eventually your Atman will not be reborn into another body because you will have achieved moksha, or release from samsara, okay? However, if you haven't accumulated enough karma, right, then you will be reborn based on the amount of karma in your Atman at the time of your death. Okay? And then I think we will skip right ahead to some of these other materials from the other day. We spent a lot of time talking about Brahman and the universal principle, right? We watched this great video talking about the relationship between Brahman and Atman. We saw this nice cosmogony creation story. We spent time talking about paths of devotion. We talked about Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Let's skip ahead to Bhakti again. Remember, this is, see, I do that in class too. This is the intense devotion to a personal manifestation of Brahman, right? So Bhakti Yoga can be part of this, where you connect with, through chant, through mantra, through prayer, intense devotion to a personal manifestation of Brahman. And those personal manifestations of Brahman have a few faces, and there are three major groupings that we talked about. We talked about the Saktas, right, the goddess worshippers. We talked about the Saivites, right, devoted to Lord Shiva, and the Vaishnavites, devoted to Lord Vishnu. Remember, Saktas, goddess. Hinduism can't be understood without an understanding of the place of goddesses within Hinduism. We talked about Shakti, right, that the raw feminine power. And we talked about the fact that goddesses pervade Hinduism on all levels, right? We've got the high pan-caste, pan-Hindu goddesses that we talked about, and we'll talk about them again real quick here, all the way through village goddesses and place goddesses, etc. And remember, we talked about it again the other day, keep in mind that just because you're devoted or you find particular connection to maybe Durga, or you find particular connection to Shiva, and thus being a Saivite, that doesn't mean that you ignore the rest. That doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to goddesses, that you don't pay attention to the gods. It's just where you find your primary sense of devotion. We talked about Durga, right? Durga, the great goddess Durga. I do apologize for the background noise. I have kids too. Durga, great goddess, represents the totality of deity. We talked about why she has her various weapons, that she rides a lion or a tiger, and that other manifestations of the goddess, other goddesses, if you will, are often seen as the many faces of Durga, the great goddess. We talked about Kali, right? Fierce feminine form. We talked about why she's standing on Lord Shiva. I told you that nice little story. And that story, like many of the stories within Hinduism, are told in different ways, right? There are lots of different versions that exist. Remember, she's also seen as mother, right? Kali as mother, that fierce mama bear that looks out for her children and protects them from that which would keep them from their dharma. We spent time talking about these goddesses, and you are going to need to know these gods and goddesses. The ones that we talk about in class, you're going to need to know, okay? We have Parvati, right, connected with Lord Shiva. She's the wife of Shiva. We have Lakshmi and Sita, who are connected with Vishnu, okay, and the various avatars of Vishnu. That's where we left off in the afternoon class. So morning class, please bear with me as we cover the Saivites and the Vaishnavites. So Saivites, dedicated to Lord Shiva, right? They see him as all-encompassing, and he is frequently associated with feminine consorts, in particular Parvati, his wife, and he has a son, Ganesh. We talked about Ganesh and Shiva and Parvati. So here we have Shiva, and that's a typo. Here we have Parvati, and here we have Ganesh. And remember, there are many stories about how Ganesh got his head. There's one in your textbook, and I told one to the morning class that I'll share with everybody once again for the afternoon class. One version of the story is that after the young prince was born, because he wasn't born with an elephant head, after the young prince was born, Shiva and Parvati invited everybody to come and greet the new prince and bring him gifts. And when the sun god appeared, the rays of light from the sun were so powerful that it severed the head of the young prince. And so everybody was really upset. But just when things seemed their darkest, a white elephant came and lay down next to the body of the young boy and gave his life for the young boy. And that's just one story of how Ganesh got his head. Next up, we have the Vaishnavites, right? So here's Vishnu. Vishnu has several incarnations or avatars, okay? Avatars. I used the kind of funny example in the morning class. No, it's not the movie. It's not the blue aliens with the tails, right? Avatars are incarnations of devas, and Vishnu has several. The two most famous are pictured here, Krishna and Rama. Okay, Krishna is the ladies' man, right? He's usually pictured with cows. He's usually pictured in a forest. He is usually pictured as a beautiful youth playing a flute, and he is connected to Lakshmi. And then we have Rama, who is featured in the Ramayana that I'll talk about here in a second, who was a prince who would become king, and is connected to his wife Sita. So here's an image from the Ramayana, right? Remember, those are important to remember because people use those epics, the Puranas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, as part of their path of devotion, okay? We have Lord Rama, pictured here with one of his brothers. We have his wife Sita, pictured here, and then we have Hanuman, the Monkey King, down here. The general gist of the Ramayana is that Rama and one of his brothers and Sita were in exile in the forest for a variety of reasons. And in the meantime, there is also another demon, a demon king, and his army running amok. The demon king's name was Ravana. While in the forest, Rama and his brother went to go hunting, and Rama drew a protective circle around Sita, and he told her, if you stay in the circle, everything will be fine. Sita is tempted out of the circle by Ravana and is then captured. And the rest of the Ramayana is the story of Rama and his brother and their forces, as well as the armies of Hanuman, the Monkey King, helping rescue Sita. This video is posted on the Moodle, so you'll need to make sure you watch that. Now we have new information for everybody, okay? Temples. Going to temple and going on pilgrimage is very important within the Hindu tradition. And so I have just a few examples of temples for you. And these are temples that we were able to visit the last time we were in India. So the first temples that I'm going to bring up are the Khajuraho group of monuments. There are Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain temples in this complex, and they are one of the many UNESCO World Heritage Sites in India. They are famous for their Nagara-style architecture, and they are exceptionally famous for the erotic sculptures on the outside, mostly on the outside, but on the inside as well of these temples. And these erotic sculptures were inspired by the Karma Sutra. They are built out of sandstone, and unfortunately, only 6 main temples remain at this point. The Hindu temples, remember there are Jain temples that exist on this complex as well, but the Hindu temples that are still around focus on Devi, the goddess, right, as well as Shiva and Vishnu. So here we have images from the outside of some of these one of these temples. Here's an image from the inside. This would have had a linga or a deity that had been a deity whose eyes had been ritually opened here when this temple was actively being used. This is not considered an active temple anymore, but rather a heritage site. Likewise, here's some examples of the outside of the temple. You'll see the erotic sculptures here. Notice the attention to detail. And here is a picture of one of the massive main temples in that temple complex. We've spent a lot of time talking about Varanasi, talking about the Ganges. So I wanted to share with you some of the pictures from the Shiva temple that I've mentioned several times, that we were able and able to visit, had the privilege to visit. So Varanasi, as we know, is a pilgrimage site for Hindus. We know that it is also known by the name Benares. That's one of the older names for Varanasi. Varanasi has several names, but Benares is one of them. And Varanasi is one of the oldest living cities in the entire world. Okay, I love this quote by Mark Twain. Benares is older than history, older than tradition, and even older than legend, and looks twice as old as all of them put together. So if that gives you any sense of what it would feel like to walk through the streets of Varanasi, or to ride a boat along the Ganges of Varanasi. They believe that, as we've mentioned before, that if you are graced to die in Varanasi, the likelihood of moksha is higher, and that this is a town that is sacred, that is special to Lord Shiva and Parvati. Okay. And we know that the Ganges in Varanasi in Varanasi in particular, the Ganges is special everywhere, the Ganga, right? But we know in Varanasi, it is believed that it has the power to wash away sins, and we know that it's said to have its origins in the tresses of hair of Lord Shiva. We saw that video earlier this semester. So the Shiva temple that I've mentioned several times in class, the Kashi Vaishnava temple, it's one of the most famous Hindu temples that's dedicated to Lord Shiva in all of India. The temple is on the western bank of the Ganges, or the Ganga, right? And it's one of the 12 holiest temples dedicated to Lord Shiva, once again in India. Temple has been referred to in Hindu scriptures for a very long time, and it's part of central to the worship of Shiva and Shiva philosophy. It's been destroyed a number of times, right? There have been a number of dynasties that have been in control of India over the centuries, and it was actually this particular temple was actually first mentioned in texts as old as the Puranas themselves. It's been destroyed several times and has been rebuilt. Here's some pictures of the exterior and the interior of the temple. I did not take these pictures because you are not allowed to have cameras in the temple or near the temple complex. So these are stock photos that I found online. One of the, people can visit the temple at any time, but at certain points during the day, they have ritual, or what they call arti. You'll watch the home arti video that's posted on the Moodle, but these are rituals that people go through at certain points in the day. And so people line up for hours and hours and hours. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people line up for hours every single day to try to get into the temple to make it to one of these artis. So there's one at 3 a.m., you guys, 3 a.m. There's one at 11:15, one at 7 p.m., one at 9 p.m., and one at 10:30 p.m. And this kind of schedule is not unique to the Kashi Vaishnava temple. There are temples all over India that have this very rigorous arti schedule, this very rigorous ritual schedule that people spend all day lining up for every single day of the year. Here's an example of the people lined up just to get into that Kashi Vaishnava temple. This photo and this photo are likewise stock photos because, once again, not allowed to have cameras that close to the temple. This is an example of some of the alleyways or causeways that lead up to the Kashi Vaishnava temple. You'll see little shops here. These are the types of places where you would buy your offerings to take with you into the temple. And then here's actually a fun little picture of our group right before we were headed to the Kashi Vaishnava temple. You'll see we're in some sort of different clothing, right? We made the effort to dress in traditional clothing to attend this temple because it was an active temple. As women, we were required to, or expected to, cover our heads in this active temple. We likewise covered our heads in other non-active temple sites out of respect because they are still considered to be holy places. But for this particular temple, we dressed up in our very best Indian attire before we made our way to the temple. These pictures I did take. These are of the Ganga, right? The river Ganges. We did most of our traveling in Varanasi to and from temple, to and from Ganga Aarti, which is I'll talk about in a second. Via boat, we traveled the Ganges because it was just easier than navigating the streets, and it was fun, honestly. But here are people gathered along the Ganges. Some of them are bathing. Some of them are visiting the various ghats that line the Ganges. Okay. Here we have, folks, here it is. This is one of the main crematoriums in Varanasi, right here on the Ganges. See, we have wood here. These are ash remains of cremation. We have some remnants of garments or drapings that might have been used in cremation practice. We were told, I believe it goes right up to here, when the Ganges floods every year during monsoon, that it floods all of this. So it washes all of this into the Ganges. But the ashes are pushed into the river as well as ritually released into the river by family. I just briefly mentioned Ganga Aarti. So Aarti, right, is a ritual that is practiced. And we recall from our previous conversations that the Ganges is seen as a goddess in and of herself, right? So every single day here in Varanasi, we have what's called a Ganga Aarti, so an Aarti for the Ganga that occurs, and thousands of people show up to this every single day. It happens every day of the year. Thousands of people show up. We have people way down here. This is way up in the pictures taken up from the gallery where we were seated. You have people out here in boats that are watching as well. And the ritual occurs. There's lots of chant and drum, and they proceed through the Aarti, the ritual on behalf of the honoring of the Ganges. I am going to just show you a couple things about the caste system because I think that the caste system might be something that you will want to ask questions of Avinash about. So this picture here is the traditional basic caste system, okay? This is very basic. Within each of these levels, there are greater or lesser levels of Kshatriyas, for instance, or Brahmins, etc. Some of the notions of this system have changed over the years, particularly in the modern day when people have been challenging the caste system. But I want to show you just what it looks like very simply and very classically. We had the Brahmins here on top. They're the priests and academics, okay? We have Kshatriyas, who are the warriors, the generals, the rulers, so these would be kings, etc. You will see Kshatriyas spelled with or without the K, depending on which resource you're using. For the purposes of our class, I don't care if you spell it with or without a K, but know that when you pronounce it, the K is silent. We have the Vaishyas below them, so they're the business community. They're the merchants, right? The traders, okay? Then we have the Shudras below them, likewise K silent. You can spell it with or without the K. And the Shudras were the servants, so they are subordinate to everybody above them, and they would work for everyone above them. And then we have the Dalits, right? Notice how it's not even touching the rest of this pyramid here. The Dalits are the untouchables that we've heard about and that often make it into the news because of the oppression and discrimination that has occurred over the years. And these would be the folks that handle the very dirtiest of all work, the work that no one else will do. Now, I want to show you this slide because of the metaphor. Remember, we talked about symbol and metaphor in our first unit. The metaphor for the human body. And this metaphor comes from the Vedas. And they use the metaphor of the body to talk about caste, okay? So they have Brahmin, the priestly caste, right, are the head or the mouth We have the Kshatriyas, the arms, right? They're the warriors, the rulers, right? They're doing work on behalf of the rest of the body. We have the Vaishyas, the thighs. So remember, these are the traders, the landowners, the merchants, the business people. They're the motion behind society, right? They're propelling with commerce. Okay, and then we have the Shudras, right? The feet, who are supporting all of the above. And the idea was that it took all of the pieces working together in interdependence in order to make society work. Okay, it's later that these pieces get out of balance, right? We have higher caste discriminating against lower caste, but originally it was supposed to be all of the pieces of the body. The metaphor states that all of the pieces of the body were supposed to be working together, that if everyone lends their gifts and talents and knowledge in the way particular to them, or wherever they are in a special position to be able to do, that everything will work well. Now, as I said, this has been corrupted. Humans aren't perfect, right? Over the years, and it has led us to the controversy or the questions about the caste system that we have today. So, like I said, that might be a really good question for Avinash. Is about caste. I'm going to flip over here and just point these out to you. These are other videos that I posted on the Moodle for you for today. You'll need to watch this video about Durga Puja. Just to put it in context, so Durga Puja is a series of days, and they create these very large images, large statues of the goddess in her many forms for the purposes of that particular festival. And then at the end of the festival, they're ritually disposed of. So these large statues are actually made of like plaster and mud and like hay with undergirding kind of forming it underneath, and then they're dressed with clothes and painted, etc. But they are ritually returned to the goddess, returned to reunite with the ultimate sacred reality by being immersed in the river. So they put these large statues in the river, and you'll see them kind of trying to break them up. So the mud and the clay, etc., breaks down, and the idea is that they're releasing that energy back out into the universe. They've thanked the goddess for being part of their ceremony, because remember, they ritually open the eyes of these images, and so the goddess inhabits them, and by returning them to the Ganges and ritually destroying these statues, they are releasing and thanking the goddess. And it doesn't just happen with Durga Puja. There are statues, large and small, that are made for festivals throughout India for a variety of deities, and they're disposed of in a similar way. We have this nice little video from National Geographic that talks about Diwali, and it's kind of from a tourist perspective. So it gives you a little snippet of what you would see and the types of things that people do during the festival of Diwali. And last up, there's a video about Holi. So this is the springtime festival of colors, and it celebrates the triumph of good over evil. So all of those are posted for you on the Moodle. I hope that this lecture works better than the first one, and please let me know if you have any questions, all right? And I really hope to see you on Tuesday. We will get those. Please remember to email those questions to me today by 5 p.m. for Avinash, and I will sort through them and kind of weed out the duplicates, probably combine some, because I'm sure some of you will have some similar questions. Get those to him so he will have a video made for us to answer your questions for class on Tuesday. Email me if you have any other trouble or problems, and I'll see you soon. Stay safe, guys. can get it to turn off.